Hi, and welcome to today's webinar, The Adaptability of the Logistics Sector. My name is Monica Monti, and I'm a member of the IOSH Logistics and Retail Committee. Our guest speakers today are Gary Milne, Operation Directors at Tuffnells, and Dr. Andrew Kemp, Product Manager at the Vue Group. First in line is Gary, who will take us through a presentation on how Tuffnells have addressed the issue of HGV driver shortage, followed by Andrew, who will talk us through the consumer behaviour and how that is changing the logistics industry. So in terms of questions, please send us the questions throughout the webinar. They will be responded to at the end. Gary, unfortunately, won't be able to be with us for the duration, but he's agreed to actually answer any questions you're going to send us through in writing. And without any further ado, let me pass you over to Gary. Over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for getting the opportunity to talk to everyone on the webinar today. I think in terms of last year, 2020 was a year really in terms of a perfect storm. Was a perfect storm by any stretch. So life as we all knew it changed for so many reasons. I think it's worth people just having a brief look at many of the things that you can remember, or certainly that people in our business and our customers can remember around what that perfect storm looked like. So we had the many well-publicised reasons: Brexit, which impeded the flow of migrant workers in or out of the UK. Current professional drivers opting to leave the industry. We had the impact of driving tests, where that was severely impacted for 12 to 18 months. So new drivers being able to come through into the market through training, through testing, was clearly a big impactor. And then, moving beyond that, how people then started to catch COVID. Isolation cases where people weren't available in the market. And then a whole range of other things which I'm sure you will remember just is the same as I do. One of the key things that happened throughout the course of last year, certainly in our business, was around customers and consumer demands changing. So we saw customer habits change, and largely changed for good. So people, their buying habits changed. People started to order a lot more things online, a lot of things that they previously wouldn't have done. So garden furniture, household improvement packs, and things which ordinarily people would have went into local shops for, or some of the big stores. Online ordering changed, as did the demand for products to be delivered either to business or to people in the home. So what we did see is a huge shift from the buying habits and the expectations from customers into what people wanted to do. And then conversely, as we came out of lockdown this year, buying habits changed again, where people then started to say, well, actually, instead of spending for the house or spending for things at home, people then started to say, well, it's the story of staycation and the story of holidays predominantly in the UK, then nights out. So buying habits changed again. How that impacted our business was a number of different things, and from there we then had to adapt very quickly, both in the business and in what we do, to be able to support driver availability. So we looked at all different ways of being able to recruit drivers, so teams, and the support functions as well. So Teams, Zoom, and a whole variety of online tools where previously people wouldn't even dreamt about, that have thought we have to interview people face to face, we've got to see them, we've got to see if we can get on with them. But the whole industry started to change because people couldn't get into the same room. Training courses had to be changed in both the method and where we did training courses. We had a switch to online, as well as making sure that where we did do training or interviewing and so on, then we did that within the COVID regulations in protecting people in the work environment. As I've talked about training and new different recruitment methods. But then also we've seen a huge shift in terms of pay and reward strategies, as well as retention strategies, both in our business and in the wider industry, where pay rates, warehouse and labour shortages had started to impact. And we learned very quickly how we needed to right size the business in terms of the reward and retention strategies we had, because we were in competition with some of the major global companies who also had a huge demand for resource, the right resource at the right time and largely the right location. So we had to adapt how we do that and change very, very quickly the manner in which we were able to reward our employees, our subcontractors or others, to be able to make sure that the business was adapting to both the challenges but also the increased consumer demand moving forward. So we've been able to demonstrate by really not just pulling one or two levers at the same time, but pulling multiple levers to be able to say, well, how do we retain people? How do we train them? How do we grow them? How do we invest in them? Whilst also being able to attract new people into the industry by offering much more flexible working practices. So instead of, drivers, warehouse or, our transport compliance teams working 5 days a week, we've been able to change that so that they can work 2 days a week or 3 days a week or 4 days a week, so that we're really being able to say, how do we match the requirements of the business and customers, whilst at the same time being able to recognise the flexibility that potential employees or managers or anyone else wanted to be able to come and pick our business and work for us, opposed to others. We've seen a huge investment in training, so actually training people to learn how to drive, people trained to learn how to do all of the new jobs, which is, taking a lot of investment, but it's the right thing to do. And it's also seen a huge benefit for us of being able to, once we've trained people, to support them in staying for the long term. At the same time, we've invested in not just reward and retention strategies and training and everything that goes with it, but also in terms of what I would call the tools for the job. So the right vehicles, new vehicles. We've invested heavily in our fleet, both in terms of tractor units, heavy goods vehicles, trailers, smaller vehicles, smaller vans, brand new 7.5 ton vehicles, brand new 18-ton vehicles. We've rolled out trails in terms of electric vehicles to combat the challenges of inner city deliveries, and so on and so forth. So quite a number of challenges by any stretch of the imagination. But what we have been able to see is how, certainly internally and with our customer base, how we've been able to adapt it, in a very agile way to meet all of those demands. I think if I could sort of leave you with one thought. In the past, certainly in this industry, or certainly in the distribution or delivery to businesses or home delivery, we've seen, things not change really rapidly for a number of years. Now we're seeing how all businesses, certainly within this sector, have to change and change continually to meet the needs of customers, and then the people that we deliver to. So huge amount of change last year as we all entered into COVID and seeing how the world changed forever. And then more so how we've had to adapt and change in so many ways to be able to counteract the challenges of the future. I think, but certainly from our team's perspective internally and our customers, we've been able to adapt in a way which continued to meet their needs despite the challenges and make sure that we were strong and stronger for the future and stronger for the better. So thanks very much for getting the time to be able to talk to you today around certainly the challenges we faced moving through COVID, and then how we've been able to adapt and improve the business and the recruitment and retention of people to join our business, whilst at the same time being able to strengthen the future plans we have moving forward. So thanks very much, Monica, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Gary. It was a really pleasure to have you on the webinar. We'll send you any questions related to your presentation, and hopefully you can get back to us. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, and all the best. Now, without any further ado, over to Andrew Kemp from Vue Group.
Okay, right. This is just really a very big overview from my experiences with Tesco, 14 years of really the impact of van drivers. So I've been in the industry of road safety for quite a while, key member, starting off with Driver for Better Business, National Driver Safety Manager for Tesco. I've recently spent 2.5 years with Kemp Fire and Rescue, advising them on basically a driver safety forum methodology, and now moved to Vue, who basically install CCTV cameras into vehicles and telematics information. The problem we've got in this country in some ways is and I'm not picking on Amazon, I'm just using Amazon as an example. I could have used Tesco, but I felt a bit mean having worked for them. Tesco's invested a vast amount of money in this country and across Europe. You can see the rise in the amount of people on the back of that £32 billion investment. That then cascades onto the roads. Now, in our previous gentleman's presentation, Gary, that's a highly regulated world. So Tesco distribution is all under EU driving hours. It's very, very clearly controlled what happens and how operations work. When it comes to the lighter fleet, there's now 4.6 million vans on UK roads. As you can see, it's a very basic graph, but it does show fundamentally that the HGV fleet effectively has dropped, and they've got bigger and more powerful vehicles that can carry more. Cars have grown gently, but vans have grown massively. In the time I was at Tesco, it went from 1,000 vans to nearly 7,000 vans. Online shopping has become incredibly successful. The pandemic has exasperated that. But to get a bit more detail on the problems with vans, is van drivers aren't really regulated that well compared to truck drivers. There's very little regulations and laws that control van drivers, and a very little emphasis on employers to train their drivers, because most companies will only do the legal minimum they have to do to get by. That's the fact of business life in many cases. So I'm not going to read these out to you or such, but you can see the amount of overloading. I know this is targeted stopping by VOSA or DVSA now, and they know what they're looking for, but it's quite shocking the amount of vans that would fail an MOT, and operators will use the MOT as their major service. So defects don't get recorded and are not kept up to date. So there's two main groups of driver as far as vans concerned. There's the plumber, the builder, the professional person, BT engineer that has to drive a van to do their job. Whereas retail, food, internet shopping is solely delivering the goods. So trying to get detailed information about where the problems are within vans and the van world can be quite challenging, because there are two quite distinctive groups and how they operate is quite different. There are now a level of people that a lot of organisations and society as a whole don't consider that well. And that's the people that come as such under the van, which is your private car driver. My wife has her meat deliveries regularly, and it comes out of the back of a car. Just Eat and Uber Eats, as I've stated here, employ about 92,000 people between them. Most of those would have no training, very little safety equipment supplied by their employer. They'll be self-employed. They probably won't have the right insurance. So if there is an incident or accident, they're in a very, very vulnerable position. Now, there's also a difficulty in collecting accurate data in the context that if you're unfortunate enough to be hit by an HGV and emergency services were to attend, that would be documented as probably a road traffic accident involving a commercial vehicle, aka an HGV. If it's a van, it probably won't. It'd be very, very unlikely. And the amount of van damage that goes on unreported, which I can account for from my days at Tesco, is quite severe. It's quite massive, really. So again, that all gets stacked up and left until it comes to the MOT. I did a presentation a couple of years ago for Kent Police, and about 110 businesses who use the roads regularly attended that, and 90% of them don't track any van damage, any vehicle damage, any sort of accident damage, sickness, because they look at it as just, it's a fact of life, it just happens, it's just an additional bolt onto the working world. Now, there are plans afoot. Amazon, I'm picking on them again, but it's only because we all know them. Domino Pizzas, for argument's sake. Lots of companies, Tesco, are trialling drone-related delivery systems, which in certain parts of the UK will work incredibly well, and other parts just not going to be a viable proposition. So we're still back to people in vans, very, very enthusiastic men and women who put the shift in, and certainly did through the pandemic, which we're all very grateful for. But you're now going to get a shift where Morrison's, for argument's sake, online shopping could have hired a pilot that had been laid off to drive their vans. These professional people are all coming back out of the industry that has grown exponentially, and we backfilled by people who've got very little in the way of training or safety nature about them. And the company won't be breaking any legislation effectively, won't be breaking any laws. Whether it's ethical or correct, that's a different thing. But that's something we need to be aware of. So it's a big subject, and there's lots of ways of looking at it. My concern has been, ever since I've started working with Tesco, is van drivers are pretty unloved and pretty uncared for. And that needs to change, because they need to have the professional status that truck drivers do. So at the moment, truck drivers are very much in the press. We are very aware of the shortage in the logistics industry. However, that final mile delivery of online shopping will be done by an untrained, probably not correctly insured individual who, if they were to be injured at work, would have very little defence to support them, unless they're an employed driver like Tesco, Morrison's, for argument's sake. So that's it, really. It's a bit of an overview. Thank you for letting me have time to talk to you, and I'll hang around for anything afterwards.
Thank you, Andrew. A very good presentation. So we're going to kind of take a few questions now. So one of those is, obviously we are all expecting deliveries at the drop of a hat. And I think that's what's fueling the amount of van drivers that are currently on the road. Do you think that's likely to change, or kind of, as drones are being brought in, and do you think that's likely to change, or do you think that we're going to keep seeing kind of lots and lots of vans on our roads going forward?
I personally think it will get worse, substantially worse. And unfortunately, the pool, a skills pool that the various organisations have to get their staff from will get less and less. And that was quite noticeable. I'll give you an example. back in the day, the attitude was anybody could drive a Tesco van. So the van damage for 1,000 vans was over £10 million. When we invested in our drivers, we ended up with this thick end of 7,000 vans and a van damage of £15 million a year. So I don't know how many people have driven vans or big box vans, but there is a huge difference between driving a van and driving a car. And I think it's very naive of businesses. I understand why it happens, fully understand why it happens, to just basically look at someone's driver license, check their eyesight, have a bit of a reference. Yep, thanks very much. Here's a £40,000 van. Off you go and make your deliveries. If you had 100 vans working on operate that principle, a good 10% of your vans probably won't come back by the end of the week. They'd be written off or severely damaged or along those lines. And you can guarantee. Sure, sorry, go on.
No, I was saying that's really interesting because I mean I don't think people think of that in terms of how many vans are written off, because you kind of expect the same rules and regulations for a lorry, for an HGV driver. So myself, I've never actually thought of that. But it's interesting because you're right. Many of those people are self-employed. And you don't know what's going to happen to their van if they're involved in a crash or anything like that. And it is quite worrying in a way. Also, with the amount of traffic that obviously is constantly increasing, having all those vans out there, it's not like making things safer, is it?
No.
Yeah. So, obviously, many companies are now, like Amazon, are thinking of using drones and things. What kind of issues do you kind of envisage coming up if we're kind of changing suddenly from using vans to using drones?
The areas will affect it. It's quite feasible in a rural environment. And the problem I have with technology is technology itself. How often do you have to switch your computer on and off and reboot it, or your Sky system, etc.? So at least with a human being, you have got that ability to interact, pick up a phone if you're in trouble, preferably when you're stationary. With drones, I think it's going to be very limited payload. So it sounds a bit, delivering DVDs and things like that by drones is great and probably quite doable. If you're looking for your Tesco shop, no, because it'll be a huge, great big drone, and I'm not too sure where it'll land. So I'm not trying to make it light of it too much, but yeah, I think there's an element. There always is an element for how can I put it, a wealthier clientele to use that sort of facility. But there would be a cost to it because they won't be cheap things to operate, and there won't be cheap things to produce in the early time. Whereas outsourcing to an owner-driver, from a business point of view, is pretty risk-free and quite cheap.
And in terms of training, we had a question coming in. What would you kind of suggest training for van drivers? Because as you say, currently they've got they're kind of just people off the street that can drive a van, and shouldn't it be at least the minimum that people need to achieve to deliver goods?
Yeah, I mean, again, I said I stuck record going back to my Tesco days. You'd have BT engineers turn up to do a driving assessment to take up an evening shift. So I can't knock their attitude to work, and they'd fail the driving assessment, but they drive around in a BT van quite happily. So it's capability and competence, and it's investing in the basics that when you learn to drive, you pretty much are taught the basics. So you pass your DVSA driving test with a basic skills package to keep yourself safe and the other people around you. That's not enough in a commercial vehicle because your visibility is cut by it. Depends how you visualize it. It's about 65%. Because you have two big door mirrors and a windscreen. That's it. So how you position your vehicle, good example would be at a Y junction. For a car drive, it's simple. You just look out the side of your car to see down the road. You can't do that in a commercial vehicle. But the skill set trust me, the driver will get into a van, start off with, and drive it like a car. So it's a short investment, maybe an hour and a half, in some good hints and tips with a driver trainer on how to drive a van well. These people aren't daft; they can drive. It's just they need to have the pitfalls of driving pointed out to them. That could be done online, and just how to load your van, and how to keep your van tidy inside the van, so your sack barrow doesn't kill you, because it's left loose inside the van, which you can often see, and parking. Just make sure you park so you've got an out, an exit. A lot of drivers will just stop because they're at their destination. They get out, they make their delivery, the customer's over the moon, they reverse straight back into their neighbour's car. So it's just that sort of thing that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, because I guess, the safety culture within organisations that employ a lot of van drivers or self-employed themselves, it gets challenged all the time, because how do they know what the reality of what happens out there is? So if somebody was, say, come off the van, kind of get off the van and twist their ankle, they're unlikely to report it because they're self-employed, and therefore they're going to have to lose money if they incur an injury. So it's all kind of a bit, I don't know, just difficult to manage for and to get a real picture of what the safety culture is within those organisations.
Very, very much so. There is, apart from a conscience or a big push from your insurer, there's not much to incentivise a small business to invest in their drivers. And the trouble with small businesses, where they probably haven't got anybody within that business who's got the wherewithal to provide that sort of training. And then when you go to outsource that training, it becomes very expensive. So yeah, it's a bit of a no-win. I do, as I say, I hope I don't come across as knocking the industry. Far from it. I really do have a lot of empathy for the position that certainly small businesses find themselves in.
Yeah, because somebody suggested IAM's advanced driver training that should become like the minimum standard for van drivers. But as you say, there is a cost associated to that, isn't there?
There is. I mean, I don't want to go back in history too far, but back in the day when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, Tesco was approached to create a ticket to drive, such a vocational qualification that then could be picked up by the industry as a whole. So when you are an employer, you go, okay, Andy Kemp's got this ticket to drive. They have been trained to a certain standard, albeit by a different company. They fully understand the health and safety aspects of being an independent outreach worker. We have to rely on that information being correct. But that was dropped by the Driving Standards Agency. They didn't want to touch it with a barge pole. So there has been some efforts in the past and some realisation that home shopping will grow by default. No one knew it was going to grow as much as it did, and has. But there should be a sort of government-led initiative that people can rely on, as such that this driver's been on a training course that gives them the basic nuts and bolts of how to work as an outreach driver. They understand health and safety issues and the law, and the fact they must do a vehicle check at the beginning of each day, which virtually very few van drivers ever do. That would give us a better starting place. So yeah. The principle's there, but again, it's expense. A small business would, to bring a trainer in from Rossborough Institute of Advanced Motorists is not a cheap thing to do.
No, indeed. Also, I'm wondering, how is obviously if the van drivers are self-employed, even from an environmental perspective, obviously you've got like the new ULEZ zone in London. How can businesses have the confidence that they're actually meeting their emission targets? Because if they're using drivers who've got like a diesel, say 2010 reg, they might not be meeting those emission targets. And yes, the van driver will have to pay for the congestion charging and so forth, so on and so forth. But surely, the company they work for need to prove that they're doing what they can to help with pollution.
In the ideal world, yes, but that does go back to, and I don't want to get too much down the lines of business and competition and fairness of competition, but realistically, the UK supermarkets that deliver have their one arm tied behind their back financially in many ways because they employ their drivers. They have the same pension rights and discounts and various other bits and pieces that the person working in the supermarket has. They don't and haven't yet outsourced. Whereas if you're delivering parcels and maybe other products, food products through a well-known company beginning with A, then that driver could well be a self-employed driver. And that's the huge difference between an employed driver. There are minimum hours, there's maximum hours you can work beyond shift. Whereas if you're self-employed, if you want to work 28 days on the stretch, 18 hours a day, apart from your own sort of mobility, there's nothing stopping you.
Yeah, because I mean, funny you say that, because we had a question about installing tachographs on vans. Somebody obviously said, is that something that the industry should be thinking of, and so that it becomes almost as regulated as the HGV drivers world. Do you see that coming at any point?
Well, I read the paper and forgot the details. The EU are bringing it in, so that anyone who operates from the UK and goes into the EU will have to start fitting tachographs. I can't remember the date. Into their vehicles. It's a very logical step, but how can I put it? Because delivery has been so poorly regulated. If you then regulate it as strictly as you probably morally should do, as you would do with HGVs and driving hours, etc., then the amount of vans needed on the road will go up, which then has the pollution impact. So there's no real quick fix. The only thing I can say is that along those lines, recently our local council had problems with their refuse collection. They ran out of a few HGV drivers, but I assume they're using holiday. So one great Thursday, 4 vans came down our road with 8 men throwing black sacks and recycling bags into the backs of vans, and it was utter carnage because at the same time as a school run. So although a big truck is a bit of an inconvenience in a bin lorry, none of us likes getting stuck behind, the opposite, you have to take a step back at times and say, right, if we're going to change it, what will the effect of that change be? And I think that's where a lot more thought needs to go into it, to say, right, if we're going to regulate van drivers, what will be the impact on health and safety, tick, business, the environment? That might be quite a negative impact.
Yeah, and also, how do you then kind of enforce it? Because if I've got my own van, I'd need to agree to have a tachograph installed, and and how do you kind of make it mandatory? How do you kind of enforce it?
Well, this is the trouble. Yeah, if it's bad enough trying to enforce social distancing when the pandemic was on, but exactly. to then turn around to 4.6 million van operators, bearing in mind for every van Tesco run, there's probably 4.5 drivers that drive it. Don't ask me over half a driver, but it's about that. There's a lot of people in that industry, an awful lot more than you think when you think of the number of vans. So it will be a big nut to crack, but that nut is only going to get bigger and bigger in the next sort of 3 to 5 years.
So do you think now, with the government actually bringing in visas for foreign drivers, if we get a lot more HGV drivers coming into the country, do you see van numbers kind of going down, or do you think that is going to, it doesn't matter?
No, I think they're two separate beasts. You've got mainstream distribution, which is your truck drivers, that would be an ongoing problem, because it was a problem 5 years ago, because Tesco distribution were recruiting the best van drivers from Tesco.com to train up to drive the trucks. So this is not new. This has been rumbling on for quite a few years, and it's just come to a bit of a perfect storm, as Gary was saying, with Brexit, pandemic, that age profile where an awful lot of truck drivers were hitting 65 and thinking, do I want to sleep in a cab overnight and stay away from home 4 or 5 nights a week? No, I'll retire into doing something else, probably driving a van. So that's the life of it at the moment.
Yeah, no, I totally understand it. I mean, obviously, lots of people are asking, should the industry be more legislated? And I think we've kind of gone through those questions. I mean, it's what we kind of possibly believe it should be and what it is 2 different things, isn't it? And
Yes.
ultimately, people, if they can set themselves up as a kind of private driver, as in self-employed driver, and they can get work for Amazon, Hermes, or all of those companies, and they can, it's also a question of they can choose what time they work, can't they? So that
Yes.
comes into the equation, because when you're kind of employed by a big company, then you get given, like, you're starting, I don't know, at 5 a.m. and finish at 1 p.m. But if you're self-employed, you can kind of maybe just staggered shifts. So it's kind of, I can see the appeal of why people would prefer to be self-employed than actually working on a contracted shift type thing. So I think it's going to be difficult for anybody to kind of enforce any discipline if people are self-employed, unless it becomes legislation,
Very much so. Again, I don't want to put too many numbers on it, but an awful lot of people who drive for, say, Tesco.com, they have several jobs. Tesco's not their only job. They have 2 or 3 jobs. So fatigue is a major factor, certainly when they're delivering in the winter evenings. They might have been up at 5 doing a cleaning job, then done a second job during the day, and then do a 7 at night to 11 o'clock shift for Tesco. Then it's not a surprise if that person's injured, really, because they are incredibly fatigued at that sort of last hour.
Yeah, and I can totally see that being an issue, because, I mean, how can you, if you cannot control their hours, how do you know how many hours they're working? It's just impossible, isn't it?
Incredibly difficult. That's why I say I have all the sympathy in the world for people who run companies that deal with vans. It just needs to be more initiatives and support for those people to give their drivers more support. Is basically what I'm going to say. Even if you're well-intentioned employer, where you get that support, where you get that training, we at Vue are putting some of that training together to be able to give to van drivers online. But it's something that if you had a crisis of confidence and sat down on Google on your laptop and said, right, where do I get training for van drivers, whether it's online, etc., there would be very few options available. Certainly in the UK, there's few around the world, but you don't really want your training done in Australian because the legislation is different. So it's a problem.
Yeah, so I think, we've had another question coming in about safety culture and how that, having van drivers, is diluting the safety culture. And I guess we've covered this, but, do you think there is anything that will come up in terms of legislation regulating vans going forward? Or do you think?
Well, historically, no. I tend to be by nature quite an upbeat type individual, but I've been dealing with van drivers now thick end of 20 years, and most of the legislation that may have affected them would have come out of the EU. Now, partly because you're a part of the EU then, so that goes without saying, but I don't see a government at the moment understanding the level of van driving as an issue, which goes back to the way that the data is collected. So if you went to, again, when you try and source data, even from an insurance company, you know, I went to a well-known insurance company a while ago. I know the gentleman in question well, and he said we can't differentiate between light commercial vehicles, aka vans, and cars. They come under the same pot. So there's going to need some effort amongst the insurance industry, the police, to capture more accurate data regarding van drive incidents. And then that might well push the government into thinking there may be an issue, because you can't see the issue at the moment. If you're in the industry, it's tangible, you can touch it. When I worked for Tesco, you'd see the accident rates. You know, there was 13 fatalities, 2 of which involved children under the age of 8. They're horrific events, and you become very, very acutely aware of what's going on. Outside of there, society doesn't. Certainly government certainly wouldn't, because there's nothing. I say, where's the problem? Show me the problem on paper, because you know, that's how they work. And you wouldn't better show it to them, apart from lots of anecdotal incidences from people that were involved in those sort of incidences.
Yeah, so I can see where you're going with this, because yeah, it's going to be, unless you've got a piece of legislation that actually says this is what you got to do, and those are the rules, everything becomes a bit woolly, becomes a bit like, okay, yeah, I can do it, or, you know, I don't want to do it, and it just it loses the meaning, doesn't it? So I kind of think, yeah, you know, and I've worked in organizations that use a lot of self-employed drivers, and you know, there is a huge difference in quality. You get the one who's conscious and the one who's kind of, okay, whatever. And it's really difficult to kind of do anything about it, because at the end of the day, if they're delivering what you give them to deliver, that's, I suppose that's all you want, isn't it? You're not going to kind of think, oh, he needs to be like him or like her or whatever. You just think, well, he's doing a job, and that's that.
Yeah, yeah, to a great degree, you're right. I mean, there's a new technology coming in, the artificial intelligent AI cameras that pick up behaviour inside a vehicle. They start by focusing on your eyes, and it can work out if you're on the mobile phone, or you're texting somebody, or you haven't got your seatbelt on. That will have a massive impact, but only if the management system act on that information. And it was a bit of an eye-opener in the world of Tesco, because Tesco won loads of awards for Tesco.com. And we used to say, well, within Tesco.com, it's great having the best processes and policies going at the moment in the UK. But if no bugger follows them, it's a waste of time. And that was not uncommon. So a business can put processes and policies in place, but until the manager on the ground level manages the driver to that policy, then again, he can sit there and go, well, we've banned mobile phones, but then you see everyone on mobile phones in those marked vehicles. So it's a top to bottom issue between senior management and the management that actually sees the driver each day, hopefully, to make sure that what the driver's doing is correct.
And again, it's a question of cost, isn't it? Because any technology you're going to kind of bring in is going to come at a cost. And again, we've got a difference between if it's, you know, if the fleet is Tesco's fleet or, you know, Morrison's fleet, then there is the investment by the supermarket behind it. But again, if it's my own van, do I want to put all those things in? Like, you know, any kind of system that could actually catch me out, because, you know, it's
no, it's the answer to that. Simple. No, they won't.
Yeah. I mean, I know on buses, because I've worked for the bus industry a couple of years back, and they're starting to now introduce that technology to actually spot drivers who may not be concentrating on the road. But again, you know, the bus is owned by the company, so you as the driver have got no choice but conform with the requirement. Whereas again, if it was your own bus, would you put all that technology on? It just seems to be, you know, a no kind of answer. You know what you just said? No, you wouldn't do that, would you? Yeah, so it's interesting, really interesting, and thank you for kind of taking all the questions, because obviously you're the only one like
No problem.
but no, thank you ever so much. I think hopefully everyone took something away from it. We're now going to send out the webinar feedback, and you know, hopefully if we've got any more questions coming in, we will definitely get in touch, and hopefully you can answer those. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Andrew, for taking all the questions, and yeah,
My pleasure.
we'll catch up again soon.